Hi, Misha here, and pretty recently did a video looking at the M4A1 carbines. And a lot of people commented that they really like the full-length AR-15 rifle. So, today we're primarily going to talk about the gun I kind of grew up with as a classic, slings. The M16A2. And the M16A4. Really, this one is the last of the full-size rifles, probably standard issue ever in American military. The A2 is kind of the last of the Ironsides. And we're not going to really focus in on it too much, but we have to at least compare and contrast and mention the original M16A1. So we're just going to have fun, kind of, again, like the carbine video. Go through each, talk about features. This isn't going to be exhaustive because it's the AR-15. If it was everything you could say about them, we'd be here all day. I make long videos, but not that long. And as always, if you could, before we dive in, please like, share, and subscribe. Today we're primarily going to be using Phoenix 62 grain ammo. Been using that quite a bit because it's actually reasonably priced brass case stuff made in America, and we've had simply really good luck out of it. So I can wholeheartedly say, after having used them for several months now, several thousands of rounds, that pretty dang happy, especially their 5.56 223. So just thought I'd mention that. But we might run a few other types of ammo out of the bucket as we see fit as well. With that, let's just dive in and go back in time. A1. This video will definitely focus on the A2 and A4, but we have to talk about the A1 a bit, in brief. And this is actually a good example here because it is a late style refurb, Army National Guard or similar, in the black. The A1 was essentially type classified in 1967 after all the developments of the XM16E1. And by 1968, Colt will be making these, as well as Harrington and Richardson and GM Hydromatic. This is when you start seeing the Colt C appear, when you have multiple contractors and the sharing of the TDP and all that, although Colt would maintain patents for another 15 years. But the design was not quite done changing. For example, the A1 buttstock, as we think of it, with the trapdoor, the fixed sling swivel, the metal butt plate, that did not appear until 1970 or thereabouts. Before that, they used what we think of as the E1 buttstock. Likewise, the barrel and the markings on the barrel would change a little bit. Even though this would be a 1 in 12, 20-inch barrel, yada yada. Originally, we would have a chrome chamber, then a full chrome boron chamber, and the early guns would be marked B for bore, and then later they would put chrome bore fully written out, and that would appear in the mid-70s, give or take. So after about 72, 73, the A1 was stabilized, and of course this is right at the end of Vietnam, and for the next really 10 years, give or take, that's the version that would ship to the U.S. Armed Forces, although in much smaller numbers, and go to a lot of U.S. allies around the world. Firing 223, M193, 55 grain, what have you. The 5.56 name would appear as more and more metric nations would adopt it. Was the difference between 223 and 5.56? Well, depends which measurement system you're using. That's the honest to God's truth. This one here, because it has the forward assist, it's a Colt model 603. The Air Force received theirs is the 604. Fun fact, the A1 was meant to be, well, really the M16 was meant to be a stopgap measure while the SPEW program was going. They picked up around 105,000 of these for the Air Force, Army, and Marines. These were ordered at the end of '63, and that was supposed to be the only batch. And by the time it was done serving, there was supposed to be a whole new gun, which never came to be, leaving Eugene Stoner and Melvin Johnson's, I still got to give credit to old Johnson, rifle is the de facto standard to this very day. However, it wasn't without its flaws, criticisms, and of course times were changing by the late 70s. The M16 introduced the M7 bayonet, originally designed at Colt for this gun, and then it kind of became type classified in the U.S. military in 1964. And this is, of course, just an evolution of the original M3 fighting knife, same basic blade profile, about 6 3/4. This is relatively late Ontario, which actually matches relatively late A1 like this. And it is a lightweight blade, good for basically poking, not as good at slashing, and not really good for anything as far as being a utility knife. That didn't keep soldiers from trying to use it to pry open crates and ammo tins and foods and, bending or snapping. Fix bayonets. Around 1977-78, NATO is meeting, and essentially there are plans to pick a standard rifle cartridge. 5.56 is really making inroads with NATO, and this would eventually result in the Belgian SS-109 being adopted, also as the M855 62-grain projectile. While this is going on, in 1979, the Marine Corps primarily meets with Colt to talk about ways to improve long-range accuracy, hit probability, durability, handling of the A1 here. And then after it's clear the SS-109 will be the winner, the 62-grain projectile, and the 1 in 12 twist rate will no longer be sufficient. As early as January 1980, the Marines start talking with Colt about, okay, we need a new rifle for this new round, and by the way, let's introduce some of those changes that we were already kind of looking towards. And this is the genesis of the M16A2 right here. Phoenix 62 grain brass case. See how it does. The Marines wanted a weapon capable of hitting and penetrating a steel helmet out to 800 meters with iron sights. And that's exactly why that was one of the earliest points they talked about. And it's one of the somewhat controversial points. This has what Colt calls field sights. Essentially, you have the two apertures, and you have a wheel that can adjust windage, but you need a tool, although a bullet tip will work. And then you can adjust your round front post up and down, again with a tool. Basically, it's meant to be set and forget, because they didn't want soldiers monkeying around with it. It's amazing how little recoil these things. So that was one point they were looking at with the sights. And Colt already had something in the works in the tool room from Henry Tetro for the LMG. This rear sight is essentially a direct copy of the LMG rear sight. We've shown the Colt LMG in previous videos. Adding a windage knob, elevation knob, 2 different sized apertures. Essentially the idea, you would use the large one for 200 meters or close in, flip it to the small one for 300 meters, and then dial it all the way out to 800 as necessary. The front sight was also changed from that round post to a square post, although it is still adjustable with a tool, different type of tool though. But that shouldn't have to be done too often because we obviously have this new rear sight, which again, point of criticism, a lot of these changes will be, although some of them are just, yeah, improvements. It's hard to argue otherwise. So the Marines kind of got their sights set up, and they were also looking towards the whole durability factor, and that had to do with the furniture. Look, I know that the A1 handguards are iconic. They're also pretty fragile. These areas, the teeth, and not the grippiest thing in the world. And you have a dedicated right half and left half. Meaning if one piece breaks, you need to, a right half or a left half. Also, this butt stock, the A1 stock with the storage compartment, it was made from pretty modern materials for the 60s and 70s, but polymers, plastics have come a long way. So, with the A2, the handguards are better. Top half, bottom half, they're identical. They also have a heat shield inside. They have ribbing. And they're just less slippery overall. And you can remove the bottom half as needed if you need to attach like a M203 launcher. The buttstock was made out of a much more modernized fiberglass, kind of filled the material. And while the early ones had a slightly different butt plate, soon they would go to this style of butt plate. And they would make it longer by 5/8 of an inch. Now, for smaller guys like me, probably the original, good to go. But even I can shoot this just fine, frankly. And the longer length of pull was helpful for big old Marines. Again, keep in mind at this point, the Army's, watching, but this is the Marines pushing ahead. One other nice thing with being a little bit longer is the storage compartment for your cleaning toolkit is that much bigger, a little less crammed in there, and that's a good thing. Now, one part that's at least a controversial add-on, the A1 versus A2 pistol grip with the finger rest. I'm going to be honest, I personally don't notice it one way or the other. I like the A1 grip. Fun fact, the hole in the bottom, that was originally intended for a sling swivel that was never ever used on this gun, although if you look at the AR-18, you can see a swivel there. That was kind of the idea. No thing there. So they just get rid of that hole in the bottom and they add the rest. I think if it fits your hand, great, no problems. But if it hits your finger wrong, well, you got to file it off. And of course they just, like I say, get rid of the hole because it was never used. So overall, the furniture, pretty nice improvements. But there's more. Your A1 here has the so-called teardrop forward assist and only the smallest amount of brass deflection. interesting. I think that was a mag thing. It felt like it didn't quite go forward. Might have been a chance to use the forward assist for once. Not sure I've ever had to use one. With the A2, we add a brass deflector for lefties. Not as good as a left side ejection, but it really does help. And we update the forward assist. The early ones had kind of the larger D shape, but soon they would go to the standard size we know. An original teardrop would not necessarily fit, especially the late kind of round style for the A1, because they did reinforce the receiver back here and up here. A1 to A2, just strengthening basically the pivot points and stress points. Not that your receiver is an area really known for having issues, but you know, why not strengthen it while we're at it? As I said, the extended mags are now the standard by the 1980s. And then of course we get to what this gun doesn't have, both mine are semi-automatic. The original A1 was safe, single, auto. The A2, safe single burst, is well known. Another thing kind of led by the Marines, who were emphasizing accurate shots, and it was the compromise of ammo conservation versus automatic fire for everyone. Look, that's just something that's been happening ever since firearms were a thing. The higher-ups are worried about the soldiers wasting ammunition. It's going to happen. So the selector would change on the A2. And then, of course, they added a tick to the side, and they would add markings on the right. Again, a little bit of a nod towards ambidexterity. Not perfect, but it's kind of showing the signs of the time. 3-round burst. Held open. Now both have the same barrel length, 20 inches. Both are threaded half by 28. Both even have the same bayonet lug. The flash hider, while interchangeable, is different. The A1 has a bird cage. It's a 1 in 12 twist with what we think of as a pencil profile. Basically skinny throughout. It does taper up a bit here and there, but basically skinny. For the A2, they already knew they were going to have to do something for the new M855 projectile. Now, originally they were thinking a 1 in 9 twist, and that would have been Jim Dandy. But during testing, they realized that while that worked fine for the standard M855, the M856 tracer round wasn't always doing great. This is where we get the 1 in 7, still chrome lined, and it is a button rifle, not cold hammer forged. That's the mil spec. Still half by 28, and we do get a new compensator that's solid on the bottom. That's to let it act as a flash hider and potentially a little bit as a compensator too. Cool beans, I guess. And then we get to this thicker profile barrel out front. Although under the handguards, it's the exact same profile as the A1. Definitely a point of criticism. And it actually goes back. Like I said, the Marines were talking with Colt, January 1980, testing. In August or September that year, they said, you know, going to a heavier barrel might help. The question, why? If you ask the Marines, leaving it thick out front, thin underneath is for bayonet use. Practice especially. The Army, their excuse was paratroopers. You know, keeping it stronger. They also said, well, we need it thinner under the handguard so the M203 will still work like it did on the A1. Okay. Whatever. A less controversial change, really one that we all love, the Delta slip ring. Taken from the old XM177 series and used on several of Colt's commercial guns. The A1 retained the straight ring throughout. That was the mil spec, but now we have this. So that's pretty cool. That's a good thing. And I think you see that throughout. A lot of the changes had purpose. Some good, some bad, you know, some controversial, some kind of universal. Overall, I think the A2 is an improvement. Overall. As for the A2, we have the same exact lug as on the A1. And I almost brought out the Ontario M9 just to have an Ontario sweep, but I just could not resist the classic round grip matte blade land K. This to me is the style you think of for the A2, although other folks might think of the Frobus. 7-inch blade, definitely thicker. And despite all the talk about the tang situation, they actually didn't have issues with these breaking at the threaded portion. Early on they had issues at the tip, and then later they had issues back here, both of which they would resolve, especially the tip one, very quickly. And this is criticized for being quite a bit heavier, but on the other hand, of course, it can double as a wire cutter with its scabbard, which also has a screwdriver, sharpening stone, much more fancy belt clip, all that. So, fixed bayonets. My M16A1 clone here is a complete National Guard surplus upper. Yes, it's in black. That's how it came. It obviously went through refurbishment in the 80s, 90s, and it's all correct, including the original barrel, but it does have an A2 port door. The original A1s had less of a bump there. They added a little bit more for the A2 so it would come down and push up against the receiver. And believe it or not, I have actually bent an A1 before, opening and closing it, where it just happened to get caught on that fence the wrong way. You know, it can happen. So I completely understand the update to the A2 port door. Not to mention it just makes grabbing it easier to close it. But yeah, this is a complete surplus upper on a retro A1 lower, with the slim rear and front pin. Of course, it is a full fence. And this is the late style Type E butt stock. The M16A1 weighed roughly 6.5 pounds, give or take the exact variant, and measured right about 39 inches long. This version the Marines were working on, with all the things we've done, bumped the weight up to at least 7.7 pounds, unloaded, no mag, just bare bones gun. And because of the longer stock, it's about 39.5 inches long. Yeah, it sounds like a Marine gun, doesn't it? The Army's kind of waiting in the wings. They too are going to need something with a faster twist rate for the new projectile, but they're just kind of hanging out. They've got quite a few A1s. It's going to take some time to get the M193 cartridge replaced. They're watching. Anyway, the Joint Small Arms Program, JASSP, approves the creation of 50 experimental M16 PIP product improved examples, and these are built in 1981, and the Marines start testing them, and soon the name M16A1E1 is applied to essentially this rifle's immediate forebear. And while the Marines are most of the ones testing, the Army does a little bit of work. The Marines are super happy. The Army's like, oh, that's great. You've got a new toy. 1982, a few small changes are made to the design, but after the initial field testing of the pips. Now the A2 with the Phoenix 62 grain. And in September 1982, the M16A1E1 is type classified officially as the M16A2. And At this time, Colt still has essentially the exclusivity, the patent. They're still in effect, although they're about to run out within about a year. So the initial orders will go to Colt. Makes sense. And it's really only going to be the Marine Corps. They're the ones gearing up. In November of 1983, they order the first batch and officially adopt the M16A2. The Marines will get 76,000 of these. But at this time, the Army, yeah, they're just going to hang out with their A1s for a bit. They're not, yeah, they're not exactly hating on it, but they're not loving it. This was a Marine rifle. They knew it. In any case, the Marines first get theirs full production models by January of 1984, and they go to their marksman team and program to see how well they can do with them. And they're digging them. They are super stoked, and they get 2, 3, 4 batches from Colt throughout the next couple of years. And things go quite quickly because, you know, once they get the mold for the new furniture up and running, there's not a whole lot of difference. Get some new forgings for the upper and lower. The core gun, identical. Going from auto to burst, they did add some extra gobbledygook in the lower, some kind of ratcheting systems. That's a whole thing. But nothing that Colt hasn't already made in the past for different concepts. Not a big deal. And these start to go in the field with the Marines. Finally, in 1985, the Army gets serious. Towards the end of that year, they officially adopt the M16A2 themselves. And by 1986, the Army is starting to receive their first batches, again, still exclusively from Colt. And this does allow them to start retiring the older and more worn out A1s. Although this would take a good 5 years. In fact, you still see a number of A1s in service at the Gulf War period, 1990, 1991. And notice I haven't really mentioned the Air Force or the Navy. They're not really involved in this, although ultimately they will end up adopting versions of the A2 as their own older guns run out. But no, this is primarily a Marine Corps and later Army effort to update and modernize. Again, some of the features are controversial. Some of the features are pretty understood just to be product improvements. And things are going swimmingly for about 2 days until Colt has a worker strike that will last through 1990. And this will change the AR-15 game forever. We're still feeling its effects to this very day. And really, this is what maybe broke Colt as a true leading company in U.S. defense. My M16A2 clone is a complete Colt upper. Assembled at the factory, and it's one of those that fell off the back of a truck about 20 years ago. One of the newer style stocks. The early 80s ones were a little different. In fact, the early 80s pistol grips and foregrips were just a little bit shinier, a little bit more of a transitional material from the A1. I know I've got a couple of shiny pistol grips. I don't know if I have any shiny handguards. It's hard to kind of tell if it's shiny through wear or from the factory. Anyway, so it's a complete upper. And originally I just had it floating around on whatever semi-automatic lower I had. Ended up with a spare Blim Colt AR15-A4 semi-automatic. It just kind of stays on here. Wish it said A2 instead of A4. Yeah, but I'm blind, I can't see. And I did put the tick mark selector there, proper for an A2. I believe that shoots. It's actually kind of hard to find a true Colt M16A2 semi-auto because most of them you find either have the heavy barrel, they were a band era gun without a bayonet lug and or threaded muzzle. Even the early A2 Sporters, they were on the weird kind of SP1 style lower without the fence, and I definitely wanted the fence. So the only really way to get a good one is to just kind of put it together, especially with the fixed carry handle. Hey, what do you know? Just like with the M4A1 video, I had to move under the porch because it just started sprinkling. Although that sun was quite hot a minute ago. So yeah, Colt had a worker strike that went on for a while. They did hire replacement workers. They did keep making guns, but A, their deliveries were getting behind schedule. B, there were accusations, probably right, so that the quality was kind of dipping. This led to an open bid in 1988 to be a new supplier of the M16A2. And this is where FN Herstal from Belgium, technically FN Manufacturing, FN USA, gets involved. In September, they win the bid to provide M16A2s to the U.S. government. Nearly 267,000, at least in this contract, to be delivered over a 5-year period. So that's about 55,000 per year. And of course, this is where, when I said in the M4A1 video, Colt and FN had a spat. Anytime someone wins a government contract, someone's going to court to sue for something. This is kind of how Colt ends up with the sole source for the M4, and FN kind of becomes the primary provider of the long rifle, the M16A2, later A4 that we'll get to. Did Colt completely stop making the A2? It doesn't seem like it. Although it seems like their production and their deliveries greatly slowed down. Phoenix 62 grain. Oh, yeah. Mag didn't go all the way in. That'll do it. And at times maybe even halted. And yes, it was this strike that just completely wrecked Colt's reputation, reliability, and it let FN get in the door, and by this point their patents are over. Nevertheless, the M16A2 is in full service with the Army and the Marines, and it first sees combat along with the Beretta, and I'm going to say Beretta just to annoy some of you. Some of you get it. It's a joke that goes back ages on this channel. M9 pistol, and for that matter, the Frobus M9 bayonet in Panama at the end of 1989, running to the very beginning of 1990. It occurred to me that was the 62 grain Phoenix. I should have put 55 in it, but it did okay. And they're replacing their older A1s. The Marines do a little bit faster job switching over. Of course, they got nearly a 2-year head start on the Army. But even the Army's kind of there by 1991 Operation Desert Storm. Should also mention that beginning in 1989, conversion kits, update kits from A1 to A2 started to become made available. And for the Army, their Anniston Arsenal did the work. Several contractors provided the straight-up kits. I think Capco is one of the most famous, but there were others. There were even some spare receivers made by Bellamore when they needed them, you know, when they wore out. And the Army would do some rebuilds. But it was really the Air Force that became really famous in the 1990s for rebuilding even old carbines, even Colt 601s, E1s, into A2s. So there's some fun instances where the lower is the early style, early, just with the original auto crossed out, X'd out, and burst stamped in. It's a whole thing. Basically, the conversion could be a complete upper, or at least a new barrel. The fire control group would be swapped out. The furniture would be swapped out. So it's really impossible to say how many older guns were converted, but it was an ongoing process. in the Army and the Air Force, especially for over a decade. Plus, again, new rifles were received from Colt, and then Colt and FN. There's not a number that I'm aware of, but just based on the contracts and stuff, you know, easily over 500,000. And by the time of Mogadishu, Somalia, all that, 1993, you see folks like the 75th Rangers carrying A2s, and it seems like after Desert Storm, the A1s were pretty much just Reserve, National Guard, or scheduled for scrap and or rebuild into A2s. Therefore, 1990s, yeah, it's the de facto standard. And that's the planned thing. The M4, the carbine, that was completely unplanned. Nevertheless, full-scale manufacturing at Colt, and presumably FN as well, of the original M16A2 would conclude around 1998, because it would be supplanted in production by its somewhat younger brother. And M16A4 clothing. Alright, rain's already over, sun's back out. Yay. In 1997, the M16A4 was essentially developed at Colt. They took the 1913 rail, Picatinny rail if you prefer, upper from the M4, slapped it on the A2, bada bing, bada boom, there you go. That's really the only difference between this rifle and this rifle, at least as far as the military is concerned. It's the upper receiver. There you go. In 1998, the A4 officially replaced the A2. Really across all branches, although in effect, really it only impacted the Marine Corps of note. And that's why we think of the A4 as that. Now, the very first A4s shipped with a removable carry handle and a standard A2 handguard. So they looked very, very similar. 1998, 99. Now what about the A3? I know you know this, but some might not. The A3 was a specialized version that seems to have appeared in the Colt catalog around 1990, 1991, and it did kind of what Eugene Stoner and many others suggested. It got rid of the burst and put back the M16A1 fire control group, i.e. safe, single, auto. Again, YouTube, these are all semi-automatics. And this was primarily purchased and used by the U.S. Navy, specifically the Navy SEALs, Seabees, and a few others who were dissatisfied with the burst mode for their operations. And primarily seems to have been a thing after the Gulf War, running through the early 2001s. But yeah, the M16A3 was used primarily by the Navy. That's really about it. Unless you're talking super special forces that kind of got what they wanted. But since the M4 was already coming around, makes sense. And I guess before I set this aside, I should say that the A2 did have some updates. This was still very much frontline in 2001 when the global war on terror began. It went to Afghanistan. It was still at the beginning of Iraq in frontline use by the Army and to some extent the Marines. The Air Force had their hodgepodge put-togethers. But it did start to see some updates. For one thing, you saw some carry handle mounted optics. Now, the Army had tried out a optics version known as the M16A2E1 all the way back in 1985, but they didn't adopt it. That said, you can look at photos of the first Gulf War, you can look at Somalia, you can look at Kosovo. Some guys did use a carry handle mount and put a 3-power, 4-power optic on. Heck, even the original Trijicon ACOGs like the TA01 were purchased with unit funds or privately, and optics are kind of a thing, you do start to see more and more on the A2 in the early 21st century. Also, the Knight's Armament, the KIAC RAS M5 rail system starts to appear on the A2 by 2001, 2002, that time period, and becomes more and more common with various accessories. And finally, in the Army, by 2008, give or take, they do start authorizing some folks to swap the fixed A2 stock out for a collapsible M4 style along with an H6 buffer. That's because, while this stock is perfectly fine, even for shorter folks like me, frankly, with iron sights and just, not much clothing on, once body armor and close quarter, like urban warfare, there were situations where they needed to adjust it in, and so you start to see that. And the Marine Corps followed suit a few years later, around 2013, 2014. They too authorized the installation of M4 style collapsing adjustable stock kits on their A4s right here. Modern mag and a somewhat old gun. Technically retro now. Officially, the U.S. Army adopted the M16A4 in 1998, but it does not seem like they deployed that many between the A2s they already had and then going to the M4, later M4A1. So it was kind of caught in between. That said, the few that the Army did seem to end up with, first they were deployed, but often they would get shifted over to training or special marksman roles, maybe even reserves, National Guard. So you really just see this as the Marines gun here. And mine, I've kind of just kitted out over the years, starting off as a Colt AR15-A4, and most of the stuff on it, it's from the surplus store and or buddies who came back from the sandbox who gave me gear, including this up here we'll talk about. So it's kind of been a long-standing project, and it's a very enjoyable gun. The Marine Corps really liked this gun. They did some testing, and in 2002 they declared that the M16A4, which were being made by FN and Colt, although it seems like a lot of them were FN, was 4 times more reliable than the M4 carbine. Not surprising for lots of reasons, but yeah, they reported that. And then in 2005, 2006 they did testing, and the Marine Corps reported that they had experienced one malfunction out of their A4 rifles in 5,000 rounds fired. I mean, yeah, this is a 20-inch gun with a full-length stock and recoil system in it, full-length gas system. This really is as good as it gets. I don't think I should change it. That'll happen. Colt made the right decision when they brought these into production. Unless you're worried about weight. On paper, the A4, as it would ship from the factory, originally they would come with a carry handle and regular A2 handguards. Then they would come with the carry handle and the Knight's Armament handguard with the rail panels. And then the final version would ship with the Knight's Armament M5 and the Maltac flip-up sight here, and no carry handle. And that, contracts could vary that up, but I just wanted to point that out. Anyway, on paper, this is just slightly heavier because of the removable carry handle, the pick rail upper, compared to the A2. The A2 unloaded everything about 7.7 pounds, give or take. This, about 7.9 pounds. Unloaded, nothing on it. Compare that to the A1, though, which is 6.5 pounds or even less, depending on the variant. Yeah, we've added almost 1.5 pounds, and that's before you add all the gobbledygook on here. My M16A4 clone, nominally Marine Corps. I know it's not 100% clone correct, and I'm cool with it. It seems like the Marines kind of kitted theirs out however they wanted. It started off as just your typical Colt AR15-A4. It did have the removable carry handle and standard A2 handguards. Found a set of Knight's Armament M5 RAS, one of the blim ones that was out years ago. Threw it on. Then I ended up with one of the used ACOGs that were out a few years back. I mean, I respect ACOG for how durable the TA-31 is, and what a awesome optic. Again, I'm blind, I can't use it, but when this one came along, I thought, what the heck, yeah. Same with the Montauk sight. This came from Colt. I can't remember if this one has one of the more commercial or military ones. I don't get too hung up on that stuff. Same thing kind of goes for the M4 feed ramps being in the upper. They don't hurt anything, they're not visible anyway. Fine, absolutely fine. The sling actually is surplus. The spare carrier, all these have cleaning kits with the sight tool in the storage compartment. This does have the more modern ambi selector, which it came with from Colt and Cool Beans. And PEC 2A. Yes, I do have all 4 of these, and I've had it for a long time, and that's just all I'll say about it. Once you do that, it's a 10-pound, 11-pound gun, essentially as much as a M14, M1 Grand, but the Marines, they're a special sort, and they really, really loved it. And what I really liked when Colt released these around 2014, it's just a standard rifle. This is a very worthy spiritual successor to the SP1. Nothing fancy, just had the regular A2 handguard, removable carry handle originally, thick stock. You could accessorize it to your heart's content. And it was priced right for what it was. And I've had a lot of fun, as I said. Now, FN themselves have made their M16 collector series with more of this setup with the Montauk sight and the M5 handguard already from the factory, and that's another option because FN's a legitimate contractor. However, because of the reasons and government situations, since they got the TDP from the government for producing military guns, technically they're not allowed to use it for their civilian guns. And they even come out of a different factory. It's a whole thing. Not for this video. I don't want to talk about patent law and TDP crap. But FN definitely makes a fine A4 clone, if that's what you're going for as well. I just happened to pick this up because at the time it was a little cheaper and more available. And I am a sucker for Colts. I'm not going to lie. These days, too, there are retro companies that are doing various A2 and A4 clones. And when these came out, the A4s, I had so many customers excitedly buy them because they told me, look, we don't have a problem with the M4, the carbine, but we're so tired of it. We are so thrilled just to see a good old rifle again. And since the weight's not really an issue for bench shooting or even vermint shooting around the mountains like out here, and again, if you don't tactical it up, it's still under 8 pounds. Why not? Finally, we come to the core with another Ontario, the OKC-3S. Designed for Marines, by Marines. Ontario was there too. Yeah, this definitely exemplifies them. The longest of all the blades, 7.5 inches. And it's a little thinner than the M9, a little thicker than the M7. We do have more useful saw teeth than the M9. On the other hand, it doesn't work as a wire cutter. Your mileage may vary. Yes, it will fit on even with the Harris. And it comes with the what they call their stealth sheath, lightweight, because the Marines wanted something lighter, handier, and more useful as a combat knife than the M9. And they got it. And it is, of course, a full tang. Another fun thing, the muzzle ring and the lug are actually separated by about 1/3 of an inch more than on the M7 or M9, meaning that while this will fit the M16A4, most all AR-15 rifles, and even the M4, M4A1 carbine, it won't fit certain things like the Mossberg 590A1 shotgun. The ACOG TA31 optic, this isn't the exact right model, but I ran across it years ago for a good price, and you know me and optics. The Marine Corps, after testing, ordered about 115,000 of these, not to mention small unit purchases, around 2005. So it became a very common thing throughout the military. The Army called it the M16A4 RCO, Rifle Combat Optic, and the Marine Corps called it the ANPVQ31 RCO. So different designation, same basic optic, might be some different variants floating around. That with the Mautic flip sight, still the fixed front post, and the Knights Armament RAS or M5, not to mention the broom handle grip, all very common things once Iraq and Afghanistan really settle in. Now this up here from Insight is the ANPEQ-2A or ANPEQ 2A, which is still kind of around, but it's really being replaced these days. But it itself replaced the ANPAQ-4C from the 1990s, and it's a infrared illuminator and laser targeting system for, well, night vision use, and I think you can kind of figure that out. And then I put just a light on here. Different lights could appear. The barrel, though, on the A4 the same. These are still 3-round burst, although by this point, kind of like with the M4A1 carbine, the ambidextrous safety selector could appear as an update. And I put a mag pull PMag. Last time I came out with the M4, I didn't have one out here. Yes, in the M4 video, I misspoke. I said these were out like 2005. Oops, 2007, 2008. Magpul released the original Gen 1 PMag. In this cabin trip, I actually remembered to bring a Magpul. Kind of like what happened with the original 30-round mags, where guys in Nam were just getting them from home. That's originally, by 2010, 2012, the Army, the Marines were kind of testing these. And by 2016, they were officially approved for use and purchase. And so you start to see at least a little bit of kit here that is lighter weight. There's pros and cons to polymer, but I would say overall, yeah, got a spare mag storage here. Again, this is one of the components I got directly from a buddy. So yeah, same with the sling, all kind of surplus gear. And they would customize these to their fit. And of course we have the Harris bipod, which is a kind of 6 to 9 jobber for obvious reasons if you're going to be lugging around a 10-pound plus rifle in the desert. Okay. Arms are getting tired, so bipod time. Yeah. Just the Marines to have a rifle that works. Definitely a very fun, smooth gun. And by 2006, 2007, optics are the norm. Carry handles are going away. And while FN was really producing them, in 2007, Colt did get an IDIC contract that would basically guarantee them about 6,800 up to 58,000 purchased over a 5-year period for both U.S. Marine and U.S. Navy use, as well as foreign sales to help Afghan, Iraq, that kind of thing. So Colt is still in the game at this point, although they're really struggling to take things back from FN. And then July 2008, we get Sabre Defense, a British company originally out of Tennessee. They actually get a contract. Bolt releases right here.
Okay.
And the bolts when the bolt is rear like that, last round you can press that to chamber around. So you're ready to go?
Okay.
Yep.
Alrighty.
Yep. And it's for just under 5,000 M16A3s, interestingly, for the Navy, and 700 or so A4s for the Marines. Why haven't you seen a Sabre defense gun? Well, good reason for that. Very, very few were delivered because in early 2010, there was a federal raid on their facilities in Tennessee. Smell that smell. See, they were not just cooking the books. They weren't just technically violating some things. And I'm very sympathetic, being in the gun business, to companies kind of get caught in the fine print. No, they had a complete set of books separate to show the government and reality. They were completely making a whole different dinner out of the books. And there's a bunch of fraud and people pled guilty. It was a whole thing. They obviously lost the contract. It would drag out a couple of years, but in 2013, Sabre Defense would be bankrupt. This also impacted the Steyr AUGs at the time, because that's who Steyr had contracted with to make receivers for him for the A3 here. Semi-automatic, so kind of sucked. But yeah, you don't see that. And so we could have had a third provider of A3s, A4s, but in the end, it's just back to Colt and FN. And if you look at the 2010s, there are various little contracts here and there. Again, most of them for foreign aid. The Army, by this point, is definitely M4. The Marine Corps, still definitely frontline use of the A4, but in 2007, they allow M4s to be issued in place of M9 pistols. And then in October of 2015, the Marine Corps says, okay, we're going to let folks start trading in their A4 rifles and trading them in for M4 carbines, and we're going to switch over the next year or so, making the M4, M4A1 our standard. In the end, while the M4 is in the Marine Corps, it actually resulted in the H&K M16A4, which had been used since 2010, 2011 anyway as a squad automatic gun. Empty?
Yep, I like that the grip up here a lot better. Keep it snug.
Yep, that's the old-fashioned one. That's a pretty old-fashioned. And I think we're seeing with the M4A1 exactly what Eugene Stoner predicted. Soldiers would not be really happy with the 3-round burst. It's one of those bureaucratic things, but the U.S. was in no way the only one doing it in the 80s. Every other NATO-aligned nation, and a lot that even weren't, were doing 3-round burst at the time. So it might have been silly, but it was kind of a groupthink silliness. But it's kind of funny, the bolt carrier really is completely unchanged from the original A1, along with the gas system and pretty much everything else, except for expanding the barrel out to be a little bit thicker. Do I think the heavy barrel is silly? Out front, mostly. It might give a little extra durability for bayonet practice and use, hard to say. But it doesn't really hurt anything aside from adding weight. Other than that, okay. I could also say, in theory, having any extra weight out towards your muzzle helps keep your muzzle down, which would definitely help with the 3-round burst because of how the gun climbs for 3-round. In 2025, the AR-15 rifle, thick stock, 20-inch barrel, full-length gas system, is all but out of American service. The ones that remain may be DMR type guns or training, but it would take a while for the A2 to actually go out of the Army. And this would be the last iron sight, and you could call it a battle rifle if you want. assault rifle if you want. But either way, the last kind of just plain Jane iron sight rifle of the U.S. Armed Forces. From there, the carbine would take over. And of course, with modern times, optics, other gear, night vision, daytime. And I'm not a gearhead. For one, I can't see to use optics and night vision and all that anyway, so my knowledge is limited. Two, I can't see pictures to do clones, so, I do what I can, but I just have fun at it, enjoy shooting. And this would be the last kind of rifle, as we'd think of it, fixed stock, 20-inch again, full size in service. Because even things like the M16A4, you have a collapsing stock, 16-inch barrel, and it's quite large compared to what else is coming, like with the XM7. And of course, that did replace the M4 on paper, although in reality, the M4 is still a thing. And any remaining A2s in the Army, I have my doubts. But the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, they're not interested in the Sig Sauer XM7. So there are still some A4s kind of in reserve for the Marines, but the truth is they're using the M27 along with M4A1 carbines. That's their frontline guns. As far as I can tell, the Air Force never really had any of the A4s. The Navy, they stuck with some A3s for a while, and that was it, going over to the M4 when they needed them. Coast Guard never really had a need. Space Force, they're too young to care. So this was kind of the last of a whole thing, and it was. This is in some ways the pinnacle of the AR-15. It has the reliability, the durability of what the gun was always meant to be. It just kind of got away from that whole being a lightweight thing. But on the other hand, with the optics, the gear, this was a very good gun, really putting the 223 5.56 round to its max. Of course, the original M855 would be replaced by the M855A1, and even newer versions you can find like the M262 and the like. So the cartridge didn't just stagnate after the early 80s either. But really a very fine rifle for the Marines for what they wanted at the time. So I hope you enjoyed it today. This was a lot of fun. 100% reliability with the Phoenix ammo and the Colts. Had one issue that's it's a known mag. It's just not, mags wear out. But I know that mag, it's marked, and I was just kind of curious. The A1 is shockingly soft shooting with very little flip, considering how light it is. I mean, this version is 6.5 pounds. Seatbelt sling. The A2, you can definitely tell it weighs a tad more. It's still not gargantuan, certainly not by modern standards. Definitely over 7.5, approaching 8 pounds. And really isn't any more or less recoily than the A1, but I like the A1, I do. But even Eugene Stoner would be the first to admit these handguards, definitely an improvement. Pistol grip we can argue about. The longer stock, if you're just in shirt sleeves, it's fine. It really is. I'm not tall, and it's not a big deal to me. The iron sights, definitely Marine Corps iron sights. They remind me very much of the original M1 Garand with all the fidgetiness, so pros and cons there. But this is a classic 80s and first Gulf War gun, and it's shockingly hard to get fixed carry handle guns these days. And then finally, thanks to FN and Colt doing one of these, it's easier than ever, and you can just really kit them out however you want. From the factory, they originally shipped them with the A2 handguard and carry handle. Then they kind of got rid of the handguard. The Knight's Armament appeared first with the removable carry handle, and then they took the carry handle off and just started including the MATEC sight. So those are 3 factory configurations that FN Colt shipped. And beyond that point, the Marines, being the Marines, used whatever they wanted and could afford on these. And so there's a lot of fun to be had. And this really is the pinnacle of AR-15 reliability. And heck, you can even put a collapsing stock on it if you need the shorter length of pull. That would be correct for a late Army A2 or a late Marine Corps A4. Yeah, had a lot of fun today. Hope you enjoyed this. It's kind of a follow-up to the original carbine video. And I've been doing quite a bit with bayonets recently, so if you haven't seen those videos, you might check them out. And we've done quite a few other ARs besides, including that M16 LMG. If you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Like to help us out, check out Patreon. And no joke, we've had a lot of great luck out of Phoenix ammo. Actually had a box get delivered out here. It was the first official package received at the cabin, so there's always that to be said. I just like calling out companies that I like, especially American companies with everything else going on. With that, this is Misha. Catch you very soon, next time.